I remember the exact weight of betrayal, not as something abstract, but something you can feel scraping through your ribs when you breathe. The town called me a fool behind closed doors and a criminal out loud. I was dragged by the collar through the saloon doors in front of men who once shared my table. My name spit out like it belonged to a dog. They said I harbored a fugitive, that I gave shelter to a woman who didn't know her place, but they never said what they did to her. They never mentioned how they broke her down to silence, and when I stood between her and them, it wasn't some righteous act. It was because I'd seen her hands shake as she dug through frozen soil to bury what was left of her brother. I'd seen a kind of hunger no man should ignore. They called me a traitor, but I'd do it again, every time. Because if protecting someone the world spat out makes me a traitor, then I reckon I was never one of them to begin with. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. They said a man's reputation was like a pane of glass. Once cracked, it could never be trusted again. But they didn't talk about the shattering. They didn't speak of what it did to a man, standing in a room where silence echoed louder than any accusation. That day, I stood alone, watching the town I once called home look at me like I was the one who'd lit the fire, not the one who tried to put it out. Her name hadn't even reached the sheriff's ledger yet when they dragged her out from under my roof, said she stole a horse and a loaf of bread, which made her no better than a feral dog sniffing around places she didn't belong. They didn't see the bruises climbing her ribs like shadows of an older kind of violence. They didn't hear the way she cried without making a sound. I did. And when I refused to give her up, that's when I became a suspect too, not of theft, but of treason. Treason against the unspoken code of the valley, the one that said men ran things, that women like her didn't get second chances, and that a man like me, quiet, widowed, stubborn, wasn't supposed to interfere with how things had always been. That morning, they found her beside the stables, curled beneath a burlap sack, her hands locked tight around a bloodied piece of bread. My mare, Ruby, stood a few yards off, reins dragging, panting hard. The moment I saw the girl, what was left of her, I knew this wasn't the kind of theft you turn over to the law. This was the kind of theft that saved her life, and maybe mine, too. Her name was Maeve, and the only reason she gave it to me was because I offered her broth before I asked a single question. She had been on foot for nearly 3 days, walked down from the scarred basin where the mining camps left nothing but ash and men who got mean when the whiskey ran out. Her brother, Caleb, had died of fever. No doctor, no burial, but what she managed with her own hands. After that, the rest was simple math. No man, no food, no future. And still, she held her chin high, like defiance was her last possession. I let her rest in the loft above the barn, gave her gloves that once belonged to my late wife, and said nothing when she slept with the shovel still clutched in her arms like it might ward off whatever nightmares visited her after dark. She didn't trust me, rightly so, but she didn't run either. And after 2 nights of storm winds and snow that bit clean through the planks, she started talking. The first thing she said wasn't about herself, it was about the land. She looked out across my property, frost still clinging to the scrub grass, and asked, "How do you keep it alive when the world keeps trying to take it?" I didn't have a clever answer, just told her you tend to what's yours, or you watch it disappear. That seemed to hit somewhere deep because she nodded slow. And we didn't speak for hours after that. But the town, they weren't so quiet. Word traveled, fast. A woman in my barn, a thief, a vagrant, a tramp. They didn't need proof, just something to whisper across fences, into pews, down bar counters. When Sheriff Tuck finally came riding up my lane, he didn't even dismount, just asked if I had seen anyone suspicious. I have, I told him, looking him square. Plenty of them wear a badge these days. He rode off without a word, but the warning was loud. By then Maeve had started helping around the place, quietly, deliberately. She fed the hens, patched my torn shirt with an old boot needle, boiled potatoes so hard they could knock teeth loose. But she tried, and every small attempt was her way of clawing back something, dignity, maybe, or just a place where her name didn't sound like a sentence. I didn't ask why she stole the horse. I didn't have to. The answer was there in every welt along her spine, every time she flinched at a loud voice, every time she stared a little too long at the fire before blinking like she'd just come back from some place dark. One morning, I caught her staring at the edge of the woods, fists clenched. I asked if she was thinking of leaving. She said no, but her voice had the kind of tremor that sounded like maybe she wished she could. "Folks are gonna come," I warned. "They'll call you worse than a thief." She looked at me then, fierce and quiet, and said, "They already have." It was the first time I realized just how much weight that girl had been carrying on her own. The thing about pain, real pain, is that it makes you suspicious of peace. And Maeve never quite let herself settle. Not until one evening, when I came in from checking the lower fence and found her sitting at the table with 2 chipped mugs and a plate of scorched biscuits. "They'll burn your mouth," she said flatly. "I ain't got the hang of it yet." I ate them anyway, told her they tasted like spring. That was the night she asked if I ever missed having someone to talk to. Not just words, but conversation. I told her my wife had passed 5 winters ago, cancer, slow and cruel. Since then, it was me and the land and silence. Maeve nodded and poured more tea, like that answer was enough. It wasn't long before they came back. 3 men this time. Not lawmen. Worse, ranchers with their own version of justice. The kind passed around in back rooms with whiskey and hammers, said they wanted the mare returned. Said they heard I was harboring someone. "Funny thing," I said, standing in the barn doorway. "That mare came back on her own." "And the girl?" one of them asked, grinning like he already knew. "She's under my roof now." "Then she's your problem." That was the moment I knew the trouble wasn't behind us. It was just getting warmed up. Maeve stood behind me in the hayloft, watching, her face unreadable. She didn't say a word, but I could feel the weight of her presence, like someone learning, slowly, that she wasn't alone anymore. They left with a warning. They'd be back, with more than questions. I waited until they were gone before I turned to her. "I can put you on a train east," I offered. "No," she said. "They don't get to decide where I go." Then she added, "And neither do you." It was the first time she spoke to me like I was an equal, not a refuge. That night, I found her outside splitting kindling in the moonlight, hands wrapped in cloth, her breath sharp in the cold. I walked past her without a word. She didn't stop me. But before I stepped inside, she called out, "Why'd you do it?" "Do what?" "Take me in. Stand up for me." I turned, the door halfway open, and said, "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything and still be called the villain." She didn't reply, but the next morning, there were fresh biscuits on the table, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't eat alone. They came before dawn, just like I figured they would. 3 riders, dressed like drovers, but riding too quiet for men with nothing to hide. I'd spent enough nights waiting on trouble to know it by its footsteps. Maeve was in the barn, feeding Ruby, our old mare. When I spotted the lantern flickering between the trees, I didn't yell, didn't warn her, just stepped off the porch and walked toward the pasture gate like a man checking on the fence line. The leader dismounted first. Abram Collis. Tall and leathery with a mustache that curled like a snake's tongue, he held his rifle easy, like he wasn't planning to use it, but wouldn't mind if he had to. "Well," he said, "I'll be damned. Hope Langley. Still keeping strays under your roof?" "I keep animals in my barn," I said. "You looking to be one of them?" That got a laugh from one of the younger men behind him. But Collis didn't flinch. "I'm just here for what's mine." I didn't answer. Didn't have to. Collis took a step forward. "She's got property that don't belong to her. That mare." "That mare walked back here," I said. "She knew where she'd be fed." He cocked his head. "You saying animals know justice better than people?" "No," I said. "I'm saying they know safety better than you do." That's when the second rider, Fisk, pulled something from his saddlebag, a folded paper, worn edges, a bounty. "Name's Maeve Dalton," he said, holding it up. "Says here she's wanted for horse theft and resisting arrest. Judge signed it himself." "The judge who drinks with Slay every Saturday?" They didn't like that. Fisk stepped down, dropped the paper at my feet. "She's ours. Langley, you can hand her over, or we can make it messy." And then, like God had waited for the right moment to make a statement, Maeve stepped out of the barn. She didn't run, didn't hide. She walked across the dirt like someone who had nothing left to lose. "You want me?" she said. "Then say my name," to my face. None of them spoke, not even Collis. "You wrote it in that book," she continued, voice low but solid. "You carved it into ledgers like cattle brands. Go on, say it now." Fisk glanced at Collis. "She don't got no proof," he muttered, but his voice cracked, just a little. That was the moment I realized something. They were scared. Not of her, not of me, but of what she might already have told, of what names she might have written down, of what copies might be floating in a marshal's saddlebag on their way west. They couldn't risk a killing now, not if they didn't know how loud it would echo. So Collis did the one thing he could. He smiled. "Be seeing you, Langley," he said. "You too, girl." Then he turned, climbed back on his horse, and left. But the threat didn't leave with him. I boarded the barn that night, hammered every nail like it might keep hell out. Maeve didn't say much. She stayed upstairs, rubbing salve into Ruby's joints and brushing the dust from her mane. Around midnight, I found her sitting by the stove. She was holding her brother's boots, the same ones she'd worn the night I found her half frozen. "Tell me something," she said without looking up. "If I gave them the ledger, just walked into town and handed it over, what would happen?" I knew the answer. I hated the answer. "They'd burn it," I said. "They'd call it forgery, say you made it all up." "Even with names?" "Especially with names." She nodded, not surprised, just tired. "They came to our place once," she said, voice low. "When Caleb was still alive, Slay sent 2 men, said he'd bought the land rights. My brother tried to fight it. Next thing we knew, the well was poisoned. 2 goats gutted. Caleb never said anything again after that, just got quiet, sick, and then gone." I didn't interrupt. "And when I ran," she continued, "I thought the worst part was behind me. But the worst part wasn't what they did. It's how many folks watched and said nothing. She looked up. "You didn't say nothing. I don't know why, but those words hit harder than any slap." The next morning, we found the first warning. Ruby's stall had been marked 3 slashes across the wooden beam, deep and fresh. Someone had come in the night and left us a message. Maeve didn't flinch. She picked up a hammer, covered the marks with a fresh plank, and walked back to the house without saying a word. But I knew what it meant. They were coming back, and next time, they wouldn't just want her. They'd want silence. Permanent silence. We didn't sleep the next 2 nights. Not out of fear, at least not only fear, but readiness. I kept the shotgun by the door and loaded the revolver I hadn't used since the last cattle rustler found himself gut-punched by buckshot. Maeve didn't say much, but she didn't hide either. Instead, she worked. She scrubbed the porch, reinforced the cellar door, wrapped the chicken wire tighter around the coop, like the hens were part of something that needed saving too. I noticed the difference in her then. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was preparing to stay. It rained the next morning, hard enough to smear the ink on the last copy I'd made of the ledger. I took it inside, dried the pages by the stove, and noticed something I hadn't before: the triangle over the B. It wasn't just a basin marker, it was a route. Each name, each purchase, listed by town, date, and transport code. It wasn't random. Slay had built a circuit, a trade line for people, and the last date listed was barely a month ago. Maeve saw it too. "That girl," she whispered. "Maribel. I thought she escaped, but that wasn't escape." I didn't ask what happened to Maribel. I already knew by the way Maeve's voice broke when she said her name. That was the moment she asked to ride into town. "We mail the copies," she said. "We send it east, marshals, judges, reporters. I don't care anymore if they come for me. I won't keep this secret." "You sure?" I asked. She nodded. "It's not about me now." So we packed the ledger copies, 5 in total, 1 for the circuit court in Cheyenne, 1 for a printing press, Maeve remembered near Laramie, 1 for a judge she swore had once saved a girl like her in Dodge City, 1 for the Denver Post, and 1 we kept, just in case. We wrapped them in oilcloth and tucked them into Maeve's satchel. I didn't carry a gun into town. I carried her silence. It was heavier. We didn't get 5 miles before we hit the trap. A felled log across the road. Nothing natural about it. Clean cut. Placed deliberately. The kind of obstruction that says, "You're not going any farther unless we say so." I stopped the wagon. Maeve reached under the seat and gripped the small pistol I'd taught her to use last week. Her fingers didn't shake. "Behind us," she said. And she was right. 3 riders, same men, Collis in the lead, this time. He didn't smile. "You didn't listen," he said. "That ledger of yours, real dangerous fiction." "I thought you couldn't read," Maeve snapped. He spat. "I don't need to read to know a lie." "You'd know it well enough," I said. "Spent your life selling them." They dismounted. One had a rope, the other carried an oil can. I didn't need to ask. They weren't planning on taking us in. They were going to burn the ledger, and us with it. I moved first, not out of bravery, out of calculation. I cracked the reins hard, sent the wagon crashing backward, hitting one of their horses broadside. It bucked, sent its rider flying into the ditch. Maeve fired once, missed, but it startled them. I leapt from the seat and tackled the man with the oil can. Fought dirty. Mud, fists, teeth. He was stronger, but I was meaner. Maeve screamed. Gunfire split the air. When I looked up, Fisk was down, gut shot, Collis had vanished into the trees. Maeve was panting, smoke curling from the barrel of her pistol. "I didn't mean to," she said, voice cracking. I stood, pulled her close. "You meant to live," I said. "That's enough." We buried Fisk on the edge of the creek, said no words, just turned the soil and walked away. Collis would be back, with more men. But now we had proof. Blood on our hands. Yes, but evidence in ink, in names, and a story they couldn't stop. Fisk's blood still clung to the wagon wheel, already darkening to rust. The forest was quiet behind us, but the noise hadn't stopped. It had just gone underground, into our bones, into the spaces between breaths. I knew Collis wouldn't ride alone next time. Men like him don't vanish when they lose. They regroup, meaner, smarter, and more desperate. When we reached the ranch, Maeve didn't go inside. She walked straight to the porch steps and sat down like she meant to keep watch for a week. The pistol was still in her waistband, tucked beside her hip like it belonged there now. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, just kept her eyes fixed on the tree line. I brought her coffee. She didn't touch it. "I killed a man," she said. Not like a confession, but like a statement of inventory, like she was checking the day's weather and found a storm inside her. "You survived one," I answered. She finally looked at me, and the rage in her eyes wasn't toward me, it was deeper, old, a kind of betrayal that never got put into words because it didn't start with her. "I kept thinking someone would come," she whispered. "When Caleb died, when Slay sent his men, when I buried Maribel. I thought there had to be someone who'd see it, who'd care." "There wasn't," I said quietly. "No," she said, "but there's me now." That's when she stood, went inside, and came back with the original ledger. She dropped it onto the porch table like a gun. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "Not even from the law, not from Slay, not from anyone." She flipped the book open to a blank page and started writing. Her handwriting was rough, blocky, but legible, and she wrote everything, from the Basin days to the day she found Ruby, from Slay's first purchase to Collis's threats, from the sound Caleb made when the fever took his voice to the way Fisk's eyes widened when the bullet hit. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, she'd filled 4 pages. She slid it toward me. "You add your part," she said. I stared at the paper, the ink, the space, and I began. I wrote about the day she came to my door, about the way her hands shook when I offered soup, about the way she never asked for help, but made room for it like she'd forgotten it could exist. I wrote about what the valley used to be, how the same men who smiled at harvest festivals also bartered human lives behind livestock trades, how they nodded at church and threatened girls with fire in the same week. By the time I was done, the page felt heavier than the wood beneath it. Maeve reached for the book again, opened the back cover. There, she began a list. Names. Not the guilty ones, the girls, Maribel, Tessa, Lark, Sienna, Pearl, Rosa, Josie. Maeve wrote each one slowly, lips moving without sound, names of the forgotten, names that would not be lost again. When she was done, she looked up. "We send this?" she said. "All of it." "And then what?" I asked. She shrugged. "Then we wait." "But they'll come," I said. "I know. And they might kill us." "I know that too." I paused. "You're sure?" "I'm tired of being unsure." I looked at her long and hard, then nodded. That night, I saddled 2 horses and rode for the edge of town while Maeve stayed behind. We didn't trust the post anymore, not for this. Instead, I handed the package to an old friend who ran messages for the Pony Express during the war. He didn't ask questions, just whistled low when he saw the seal. Trouble? Truth, I said. He rode out at dawn. By the time I returned, the barn had been set on fire. Not entirely, just enough to send a message. Maeve had beaten it back with wet sacks and water pails. The mare was shaken, but alive. The hay blackened on one side. The air smelled like burnt trust. She didn't cry. She just looked at me and said, "Then it started." And I knew what she meant. The waiting was over. You can smell fear before it rides in. It's not smoke, not sweat. It's something older, like rust in your mouth or the sound of a screen door creaking just a second too long. It started with the town. Not fire, not guns, whispers. The kind that dig into your skin and grow like mold. Hope Langley's sheltering a killer. He's taking sides against good men. That girl, she ain't just a thief. She's poison. By the time we rode into Carson Hollow for supplies, folks parted like we were disease. Shopkeepers said they were out of flour before we even asked. The apothecary locked his door as we approached. Maeve didn't blink. She walked tall, chin set, hair tied back like she was preparing for trial and battle at once. But I saw it. The weight, the silence she carried like a sack of stones tied to her ribs. As we passed the chapel steps, Reverend Hartley turned away. That one hurt. He was a man who once gave sermons about justice, about sheep and wolves. But now the wolf wore a smile, and the sheep bled out quietly while the town took notes. We didn't stay long, didn't need to. As we rode out, I saw Collis again, standing by the saloon, chewing a toothpick, boots polished like he was still respectable. He tipped his hat to me, then spit at the ground. "Hope," he called, like we were old friends. "Heard you've been sending stories out west. Dangerous time for a man to forget who feeds him." I stopped the horse. "You don't feed me," I said. "You never did." "Sure," he grinned. "But I've starved plenty before. Don't think I won't again." He didn't need to say more. They weren't just planning to silence us, they were turning the town first, making sure that when the noose came, there wouldn't be anyone left to loosen it. That night, we heard the scream. Not close, maybe a half-mile from the barn, but sharp enough to rip the stillness open like a wound. Maeve ran faster than I did. We found her by the riverbank. Tessa. She was 14, barefoot, bloodied, face swollen, hands tied. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Maeve dropped to her knees beside her. Cutting the rope with a broken blade, she kept tucked in her boot. Tessa clung to her, shaking so hard I thought her bones might split. She had escaped Slay's new holding. They were moving girls again, faster now, hiding them deeper into the mining trails. The ledger had been mailed out, but it hadn't stopped the trade. It had accelerated the desperation. Slay was clearing evidence, human evidence. Tessa was supposed to vanish. She hadn't. Maeve carried her back to the house in her arms. Didn't speak, just kept whispering something I couldn't make out. Maybe her name, maybe an old prayer. We laid her on the cot, and for the next 12 hours, we waited. I boiled water. Maeve cleaned the wounds. Tessa never opened her eyes. By dawn, her fever broke. She'd live, but that wasn't the miracle. The miracle came with her whisper. They kept books, names, a room with locks, North Ridge, cabin with red door. Maeve looked at me. "We find it," she said. The North Ridge was a place folks only talked about during dry summers or fire season, where water pooled in narrow gullies and hawks circled low, hunting things too weak to climb. It wasn't a place you stumbled into. You had to mean it. Maeve and I left just before dawn. Tessa still slept. We left her with a neighbor I trusted once, old Maggie Bell, who'd nursed my father when fever took half the valley. Maggie said nothing when we showed up at her door with a half-conscious girl, just nodded and made space. We rode light, 2 packs, 1 rifle, a canteen, and the resolve that comes when silence has stopped being safety and turned into guilt. The trail curved narrow along the ridgeline. No wind, just the sound of hooves crunching frost. Maeve rode ahead, face locked, jaw tight. She didn't speak until the cabin came into view. A squat building, tin roof bowed in the middle, flanked by pine on both sides like a mouth with broken teeth. And the door, bright red, just like Tessa said. Maeve dismounted, drew the pistol from her waistband. "You think anyone's inside?" I asked. She didn't answer. She already knew. We approached slow, boots sinking into half-frozen moss. The silence was too clean. I raised my hand. Maeve nodded. I kicked the door open. Nothing. Dust, rot, a stove cold for days. Then I saw it, a trapdoor beneath a pile of canvas sacks. Maeve yanked it open. A narrow wooden ladder led into dark. She didn't hesitate. Down she went. I followed. The smell hit first, damp stone, mildew, sweat. The room below was barely 6 feet high, lit by a single pane of glass above. In the corner, crates, 10 of them, stamped with cattle feed labels, but wrong size, wrong smell. Maeve cracked one open. Inside, papers, dozens of ledgers, some bound, some loose, others tied in leather cords. She opened one, flipped a few pages, stopped. Her fingers trembled. I stepped closer. The handwriting was Slay's. I recognized it from our court documents. Precise, vain, too neat for a man who dirtied so many lives. Names, ages, origins, prices, some marked with red check marks, others circled, girls, some boys, from towns I'd heard of, and others that didn't even show on maps. Maeve collapsed to her knees. This is the whole ring," she whispered. "Not just Basin, not just Collis." She handed me another ledger. This one was newer. Inside, a list of buyers, sheriffs, judges, traders, priests, men who'd spoken against sin in public while purchasing girls with scars on their wrists. At the bottom of the last page was a code. Clean west before frost. "They're planning to torch it," I said. "Burn everything. Evidence. Girls. Witnesses." Maeve nodded. "We take all of it." We packed what we could into sacks, 5 ledgers, bundles of receipts, letters from judges who'd accepted payouts. We climbed back up, closed the hatch. That's when we heard it. A boot scuffed outside. Maeve dropped. Gun raised. I peeked through the window. Collis. And 2 more men. They'd followed us. We didn't wait. We smashed the back window, climbed out, and ducked behind the tree line just as the front door creaked open. Maeve motioned to split. She'd draw them left. I'd circle right. I hated it, but I trusted her. We vanished into the trees. I waited until I saw them inside. Then I made my move, backtracked through the ravine, flanked wide, and circled to the front. Maeve was already there. Bloody lip, torn sleeve, one eye swelling, but alive. She'd taken one down. The others were gone. We didn't linger. We rode out with the ledgers. No words, just purpose. Back at the ranch, we buried the evidence in the root cellar. Maeve bandaged her arm and said, "We end this now. No one else will speak, so we will." The town square never looked smaller than when shame filled it. 3 days passed after the ridge, and nothing moved. Not the law, not the mail, not even the wind. Like Carson Hollow itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which way the fire would jump. We'd sent the second set of ledgers westward with a railman who owed me a favor from my cattle trading days. But the question wasn't whether they'd arrive, it was whether we'd still be alive when they did. By the time Slay rode in, nobody pretended anymore. He wasn't hiding behind collis or bounty papers now. He wore a black frock coat, polished boots, and a silver brooch at his throat. He looked more preacher than criminal, which made him more dangerous than ever. He stood right outside the general store, tipped his hat to the mayor, and spoke loud enough for every ear to catch. "I come not with accusations, but for restoration. This town was clean once." He didn't mention us, not by name. He didn't need to. People were already looking at our place like it was cursed ground. They'd heard whispers about the ledgers, the fire, the bloodied girl in Maggie's house. But they didn't want truth. They wanted peace, even if it meant burying everything that made them uncomfortable. That night, the barn burned again. This time, no warning. We were asleep when the smoke hit my lungs. I bolted upright, grabbed the rifle, and ran barefoot into flame. Maeve was already dragging the mare out, arms blackened with soot, her braid undone, eyes red. We fought it with buckets, blankets, prayer. We lost. The barn collapsed just before sunrise. All that remained were the stones at the foundation and Ruby's shaking body in the yard. No sign of Slay, no note, no signature, just the burn of his silence. We gathered what remained and rode into town, not hiding, not asking. Maeve wore the ledgers strapped to her chest beneath her coat. I carried one under my arm. The town square was full. Market day. Stalls open. Children laughing. Bread steaming on carts like the world hadn't gone crooked. We didn't speak until we reached the courthouse steps. Then Maeve turned and faced them all. "My name is Maeve Dalton," she said, voice raw but steady. "I was bought, sold, chained. I was 14. My brother tried to stop it. He died choking on his own blood. I survived, barely. No one moved. I was traded like livestock under names you know, names you vote for, names who pray beside you on Sundays. Still no one moved." She opened the ledger, read names, sheriffs, teachers, preachers, each name like a hammer on stained glass. A woman dropped her fruit basket. A man removed his hat. No one stopped her, not even when she listed the children. Tessa, Maribel, Sienna, Josie, girls who vanished, some who returned broken, some who never did. Then she looked at me. I stepped forward. "This is not a story," I said. "It's a reckoning. This town raised its fences high and its conscience low, and we've lived with that rot for too long." Slay appeared at the back of the crowd. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just watched, like a man calculating how long it would take to clean the blood before someone noticed. Then Maggie Bell stepped forward, slow, wrinkled, cane in hand. "I knew," she said. "We all did. We just didn't want to say it out loud." Another voice followed, then another, until the silence cracked, not loud, not heroic, but cracks let light in. By nightfall, a marshal wired back from Cheyenne. Said he was on his way, said the ledgers were enough to begin. Slay rode out at dawn, said nothing, but he didn't burn anything else, and this time the town watched him go. The marshal arrived 4 days later, just after sundown, riding a dust-stained chestnut and carrying nothing but a rifle, a ledger satchel, and a name too clean for the dirt he was about to walk into. Marshal Eli Rook. Thin as fence wire, coat too long, eyes sharp as flint and just as forgiving. He didn't ask where to go, didn't shake hands or take coffee. He just walked straight into the courthouse and told the mayor to clear the docket. "I'm not here for ceremonies," he said. "I'm here for the books." We gave him the ledgers, all of them. He read through each page like he already knew what he'd find. And he didn't once stop to ask if it could be real. It was real. He'd seen it before. In Nebraska. In Utah. In parts of Kansas where wagons carried more than grain, and the law liked to look the other way if the ledger said debt paid. He looked up from the last page, and for a moment his voice caught. "You know what this means?" he asked Maeve. She nodded. "They'll come for us." "No," he said. "They'll come for me." And for the first time, I saw it, not just the weight of truth, but the burden of being its keeper. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did we. By morning, he had names, a list, warrants ready to be served. First was Collis. We found him on the edge of the ridge, loading a wagon like he meant to vanish into the Dakota plains. When the marshal called his name, he didn't run. He just turned, real slow, and smiled. "About time, he said. Told Slay it wouldn't last forever." He came without a fight, almost proud, like the fall was worth it if it proved how long he'd stood before it came. The others weren't so easy. One preacher tried to burn his house before we arrived, set fire to the ledger pages he thought would save him. Didn't know we had copies. Another shot himself before sunrise. The rest pretended they'd never known. But the town had changed. This time, people didn't look away. They watched, and they remembered. But Slay was gone. No one knew where. The marshal wired Dodge, Laramie, even back east to Missouri. Nothing. "He'll surface," Rook said. "Men like that don't run. They hide behind new names, but they don't run." Maeve sat by the window that night, hands folded over her knees like a woman waiting for a ghost. "He's not gone," she said. "He's watching, waiting to see if we blink." I believed her. I didn't sleep either. Because when someone like Slay disappears, it doesn't mean he's vanished. It means he's choosing his return. 2 days later, the letter arrived. No return name, just a wax seal. Inside, a single sentence. "What you burn, you bury. What you bury, you carry." Maeve read it once, then tore it in half. It happened the way rot always returns, quiet, disguised, and wrapped in something that used to be good. It was near midnight, 5 days after the letter. Maeve had fallen asleep on the rocking chair. Her pistol was tucked beneath a wool blanket, half gripped in her right hand, even while her chest rose and fell slow, like the ocean finding rest for the first time in years. I sat by the hearth, journal open in my lap, but hadn't written a word. Couldn't, not since the letter. Something about those 10 words had landed deeper than any bullet or bounty ever could. Then the knock came, soft. 3 taps, not a fist, not a hammer, a knock, like a man who believed he still deserved to be let in. I stood. Maeve didn't stir. I crossed the room, rifle in hand, and opened the door an inch. And there he was. Slay. No guards, no gun, no smile. His coat was cleaner than expected, his beard trimmed. The kind of neat that meant he'd planned this visit, rehearsed it, but his eyes were wrong, too bright, too calm. He removed his hat. "Evenin'. Hope." I didn't speak. He waited a beat. "I'd like a word." "You had plenty," I said. "In ledgers, in contracts, in graves." His jaw tightened. "I didn't come for violence." No? I raised the rifle slightly. Then why bring it with you? He glanced down. He wasn't armed, but the violence wasn't in his hands. It was in his mouth, and worse, in the belief that he still had a right to be heard. He took one slow step forward. I came to make a deal. Behind me. Maeve stirred, then stood, her voice, rough from sleep, cut through the doorway like steel. There's no deal. Slay blinked, the first crack in his calm. I know what you sent, he said, and I know who you sent it to. You've caused enough mess. But I can clean it, quietly. In exchange, you vanish. The girl, the ledgers, all of it. I lowered the rifle. Only an inch. Why? I asked. Why now? Slay looked past me, right at Maeve. I'm tired, he said. Tired of carrying it all. There's too much blood, even for me. It was the closest thing to a confession I'd ever heard from a man like him. But it wasn't redemption. It was fatigue, rot running out of room. Maeve stepped beside me. If you were tired, she said, you'd lie in the grave you dug. He didn't flinch, just nodded once. I had to try. Then he turned, walked into the dark. No threats, no bullets, just the crunch of his boots fading into the trees. We didn't sleep. Neither of us believed that was the end. People like Slay don't die with grace. They die screaming, or they live long enough to watch their names scraped off every stone they ever built. And Maeve, she didn't want revenge. She wanted silence to end. And that, I knew, was the one thing Slay feared more than prison. 2 nights later, the church caught fire. No one was inside, but the message was clear. Slay wasn't negotiating anymore. He was cornered, and he was striking out. We gathered the town at dawn. Rook stood beside us. So did Maggie Bell, the mayor. 3 women from Basin who'd never dared speak in public until that moment. Maeve stood at the front. She didn't read names this time. She read stories. Tessa's, Maribel's, her own. By the time she was done, even the air felt different. Not clean, but clearer. And from that clarity, a single question. Where do we make our stand? It rained the day we decided to stop running. Not a heavy storm, just a steady drizzle that made everything slick and honest, the kind of rain that soaks into the bones. Not to chill you, but to remind you you're still alive. Marshal Rook stood on the steps of the old schoolhouse, rifle across his chest, hat dripping water in steady rhythm. Maeve was beside him, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of her borrowed Stetson. She didn't speak much anymore, but her silence had changed. It wasn't fear, it was a choice. We had posted the final notice that morning. Slay Carter, wanted for unlawful trade in human lives. Warrant to be served without delay. Citizens of Carson Hollow stand as witnesses. We didn't expect him to walk into town, but we knew he would, because there was nowhere left for him to hide. He came at sunset, horse slow, alone. Same silver brooch at his collar, same polished boots. But the town didn't part this time. They gathered, silent, not just watching, but standing. The mayor, the teacher, the widow who lost 2 daughters to boarding school placements that never returned. Men who once nodded at Slay now shifted uneasily. Mothers held children tighter. Slay dismounted, dropped the reins, and walked to the center of the square. No weapon, no guards. He raised his hand slightly. I didn't come to be judged, he said. I came to tell my story. Rook stepped forward. This isn't a courtroom, he said, and you're not owed anything. Slay smiled, but it didn't land. I built this town, he said, While the rest of you drank and prayed, I fed your sons, put roofs over your schools. I did what I had to do. You bought girls, Maeve said coldly. You sold bodies like cattle. He turned to her, eyes burning, not with rage, but with recognition. I saved you. No, she said. You kept me. There's a difference. The silence after that could have crushed a church bell. Then the sound of boots, dozens of them. The townspeople stepped forward. Rook raised the warrant. Elias Slay Carter, he said, voice loud and clear, by authority of the state of Wyoming, you are under arrest. Slay didn't move, didn't flinch, but his eyes darted to the faces around him and found no place to land, no allies, no shadows to duck behind. For the first time, he looked like a man afraid of silence, and in that moment, he did something no one expected. He knelt, not in surrender, but in collapse. The air left him. The weight of what he'd done, and what was no longer his to control, finally crushed his spine. They took him in chains. No resistance. No words. Just rain, rattling off tin roofs, as he vanished down the road toward the county jailhouse. Maeve didn't speak. Not then. Not for hours. We stood on the porch together that night, watching the sky clear. Finally, she said, he'll be forgotten. I nodded. But they won't. She turned to me. The girls? Their names are safe. Written, spoken. Remembered. She nodded once, then went inside. The morning after Slay was taken, I walked past the smoldering frame of the church again. The bell was gone, melted. Maybe. The cross had collapsed, lying sideways like a fallen signpost in some story that no longer pointed the way. But the pews were intact, charred, but standing. Maggie Bell sat on one of them. She was cleaning it with a damp cloth. Slow strokes, like she was polishing memory itself. I didn't ask why. I knew. Some things you bury, some you restore. Others, you just keep alive so they won't be forgotten. Maeve came out later, a fresh bandage around her left wrist and a pail of feed for Ruby. The mare still spooked at shadows, but she followed Maeve now like a sister. We were quiet that day, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was peace. Hard-earned, fragile, the kind that doesn't sing. It hums low under your skin. Marshal Rook had left 2 days after Slay's arrest. He didn't stay for the hearing, said he had other towns to visit, other ledgers to open, but before he left, he pulled me aside. You did something rare here, he said. You told the truth and stayed standing. Barely, I said. He tipped his hat. Barely's how most good things begin. Then he was gone. Maeve started teaching. Just a few girls at first. Tessa, Lark, the Miller twins. They gathered under the willow behind the barn, reading out loud from hand-me-down books and correcting each other with laughter that didn't sound like survivors, but builders. Sometimes they'd ask questions about the past. Maeve never flinched. She answered honestly, but she didn't dwell, because what happened to her didn't define her. What she did next did. The town changed slow. Some families left, unwilling to stay in a place where silence no longer protected them. Others moved in, folks who'd heard whispers of a town that faced its devils and lived. The mayor asked Maeve to join the town council. She declined. I don't want a seat, she said. I want a door, one that stays open. We rebuilt the barn, not because we needed it, because we could, and because sometimes the act of rebuilding is a way of saying, I'm still here. You didn't erase me. One morning, I found Maeve on the ridge overlooking Carson Hollow. She was writing again, not in the ledger, but in a new journal. Blank pages, filled now with names, not of the lost, but of those who stayed, fought, changed. She handed it to me. "I thought maybe one day," she said, "someone else will need to know." I nodded. They would, because stories like ours don't die. They echo. It was Maeve who found the last piece. Not in a box or buried deep in some cellar. It was in the roots of the old cottonwood behind the barn, twisted into the soil like it had been waiting, a length of rusted chain, no longer than her forearm. Links fused at the ends where heat or force had once tried to tear them apart. She brought it to me in silence, laying it across the kitchen table like it was a question neither of us had the answer to. I didn't ask how she knew what it was. I knew, too. That chain had once wrapped a child's ankles. The metal still bore the faint imprint of bone. We stared at it for a long while. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even proof. But it was the last echo of a time that tried so hard to vanish beneath clean linens and polite smiles. "I thought it was all gone," Maeve said. "It never is," I answered. "Not all the way." She nodded. Slow. Then did something I didn't expect. She wrapped the chain in a piece of canvas, dug a hole behind the barn, not deep, just wide enough, and placed it inside. Then she covered it with earth. No prayer, no marker, just one sentence. "We don't need to forget to forgive." The next week, a letter arrived. It was from a girl in Kansas. She had read about the trial, heard about Maeve through a cousin who'd passed through the hollow looking for work. She didn't sign her real name, but the letter said enough. "They told me to be quiet, but you weren't. You stood, so now I'm trying it too." Maeve read the letter 5 times, folded it carefully, then placed it in the same journal she'd started on the ridge. Not under names, not under justice, but under a page titled After. There were more letters, a dozen by fall, then more by winter. Some just said, "Thank you." Others told stories no one else had dared listen to before. Maeve never called them victims. She called them witnesses, because that's what they were, not broken things, but truth-bearers. I found her one morning writing a reply to a girl named Ruthie, 14, escaped at 12, still afraid to say where from. Maeve's letter was short. "You are not the worst thing that happened to you. You are what comes next. Write it, speak it, bury nothing." The court sent word that Slay had been moved again. Federal prison this time. He'd appealed twice, denied both times. One line in the report stood out to me. "Subject exhibits no remorse, only weariness." Maeve read it and didn't blink. "Good," she said. "Let the weight do what the noose couldn't." The rains came early that spring. The cottonwood bloomed brighter than we'd ever seen. And the ledger, it stayed on the shelf, not forgotten, but closed. Because we didn't need to open wounds to remember why we healed. Certainly. Continuing now with the final chapter. It's strange, the things that last. Not the buildings, not even the names chiseled into courthouse stone. Most of those fade faster than the ink on a receipt. What lasts are the quiet choices, the ones nobody sees, the ones made without applause. Like Maeve waking up early to pack lunch for the girls before lessons, leaving a note beside the stove that read simply, "You have enough, you always did." Or Maggie Bell, who now opened her porch every Sunday to any woman, or man, who needed to speak a truth too heavy to carry home. Or the little wooden bench at the edge of town, carved by the hands of a boy who never spoke again after watching his sister disappear, until he sat beside Tessa and heard her laugh. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, but it mattered. The last time I saw Maeve cry wasn't in pain. It was when she received a letter from a woman named Ada. 71 years old, lived her whole life silent. But after reading Maeve's testimony in a reprinted article passed from hand to hand, she finally told her daughter the story of what happened to her in 1954. Her daughter cried, but not because she was angry, because she believed her. For the first time, we planted a tree on the North Ridge that spring. Not a monument, no plaque, just a strong young cottonwood, next to the one that had already stood through all the years of silence, fire, and rebirth. Maeve stood beside it, arms crossed, hair pulled back against the wind, eyes locked on the horizon. "It'll grow crooked," I said. "Good," she replied. "So did I." We laughed. The wind carried it. The whole ridge seemed to exhale, and then time passed. The barn filled with tools again. Children's laughter returned to the hollow. Names were spoken without fear, and some were never spoken again, but not out of silence, out of peace. I never did leave Carson Hollow, not because I was stuck, but because I had roots now. Not in land, not even in the ranch, in what we'd done, in what we'd undone. Maeve kept teaching, wrote a book, testified once more in front of the state legislature, then declined every interview after that. She didn't want to be a face. She wanted to be a foundation. The chain we buried, it's still there. We don't dig it up, but we visit once a year, just to remember, not what happened, but what it cost not to speak. And me, I still write, not ledgers, not judgments, just pages, pages of memory, of the day she stole a horse and a loaf of bread, and ended up stealing back something none of us thought we'd ever get again. Dignity, voice, hope. Some wounds do not scream when they are made. They bleed quietly, beneath the skin of history, under the weight of silence that generations learn to carry like inheritance. But the truth, no matter how long it stays buried, does not rot. It waits, in ledgers, in whispers, in the courage of one voice that refuses to be silenced. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice in the way the world defines it. It was about standing, shaking, and speaking when it would have been easier to vanish. It was about the quiet defiance of rebuilding in the very place where things were torn down. We are not only shaped by what happens to us, we are defined by how we respond to it. Some of us will carry chains. Others will bury them. But the choice to remember, to name what hurt us, and who we became in spite of it, is what turns survival into strength. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories that matter. And above all, never forget, your voice has the power to break silences far older than you know. We'll see you next time.